I was straightening the flowers on the table beside her bed, white lilies already beginning to curl when Mason tugged my sleeve. His voice was small, barely above a whisper. "Grandma, Mom's not sick. She's pretending." I turned to him slowly. "Don't say that," I murmured, eyes flicking back to Inez's motionless face. Tubes ran from her nose, machines hummed low and steady, and the steady beep of the monitor filled the sterile air. But something in me shifted, as if a door I didn't know was locked had quietly opened. Mason didn't argue. He just looked down and pulled something from his jacket, his phone. I took it hesitantly. The screen lit up. There were only a few photos, nothing recent, but in the video folder, a single clip. My thumb hovered, then tapped. Inez lay in the hospital bed. The angle was awkward, but clear enough. She opened her eyes, slowly, looked around the room, shifted, reached for a bottle of water, drank. Then she lay back down and closed her eyes again. I stared at the screen long after the clip ended. "She did that twice," Mason said. "I thought she'd get up. But then Dad came back and she stopped." I looked at him, his earnest face, his furrowed brow, and nodded, though I couldn't speak. "Don't tell anyone yet," I said, finally closing the phone with shaking hands. "Not even your dad?" He nodded. He didn't ask why. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off. The refrigerator buzzed. My tea went cold. By dawn, I had made a decision. The next morning, I walked past the security desk, past the vending machines, past the smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. I found Juan asleep in a plastic chair, head tilted back against the wall, arms crossed. His feet twitched every now and then, like he was running from something in his dreams. Inside the room, Inez hadn't moved. She lay as she had the day before, still pale, quiet. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor filled the silence, counting heartbeats that no one seemed to question. Her hair was neatly brushed, her lips just dry enough to look real. Whoever was maintaining the illusion was doing it well. Mason stood beside me, his shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. I crouched down. "Can you show me again?" I whispered. He pulled the phone from his jacket and handed it over. The screen flickered as the grainy video began to play. There she was again, the same footage. Inez's eyes fluttered open. Her head moved slow, careful. She scanned the room. Her fingers reached for the water. She drank, swallowed, sighed. Then she slid back into position and shut her eyes. My fingers curled around the edge of the phone. "Hide this," I told him. "Keep it safe. Don't watch it again. Don't tell anyone you have it." He nodded, once lips pressed thin. As we walked out, Juan stirred, but didn't wake. I brushed his shoulder lightly. He muttered Inez's name, then went quiet again. In the parking lot, I sat in the car with the engine off. The morning sun hadn't burned through the clouds yet. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found the number buried deep in my contacts. "Delgado." He answered on the second ring. "Yeah, it's Camilla," I said. "I need cameras. For a hospital room. I think she's faking." There was a pause. "Then send me the dimensions. I'll have them by tonight. No questions. No disbelief." Delgado met me behind the bakery just after dusk. The smell of dough still hung in the air, heavy from the last batch I'd pulled from the oven. He parked his old truck by the alley engine, idling, and handed me a small canvas bag. "Motion triggered," he said. "Quiet lenses, long battery. Don't get sentimental, Camilla. Just record what's there." "I don't need sentimental," I replied. "I need the truth." He nodded once, then drove off, leaving me with the bag and a stomach that felt carved out. By 8, I was back at the hospital. I carried a container of soup wrapped in foil, the kind of small gesture nurses were used to ignoring. Juan sat by Inez's bedside, murmuring something I couldn't hear. When a nurse called him into the hallway to sign paperwork, I stood quickly. I placed the first camera on the bookshelf, angled low, facing her bed. The second went behind the vent near the window light, no bigger than a pin. My hands were steady, but my breath wasn't. When Juan returned, I was back in the chair spooning soup into a cup I knew she'd never drink. She didn't move, not even a twitch. But as I turned to leave, I caught it a flicker beneath her eyelids. A blink. I left the hospital with my chest tight, unsure if I'd imagined it. At home, the bakery lights were off, but I kept one small lamp burning beside the monitor Delgado had set up. The cameras streamed in silence. Hours passed. The house was still. Then at 2:43 a.m., movement. Inez. She opened her eyes, sat up carefully, pulling a folder from under the bed. She pressed something on her phone, then spoke softly, words just clear enough to make out. Soon, she said. Once the payout clears. My hand froze above the keyboard. She ended the call, tucked the folder away, and lowered herself back down. Face calm, lips parted, eyes closed. I sat there until dawn, staring at the frozen image on the screen, already knowing what I had to do next. Mason came into the bakery while I was folding the morning receipts, his backpack still hanging from one shoulder. He placed a sheet of paper on the counter. I made this at school, he said. 4 stick figures stood beneath a crooked sun. Him, Juan, me, and Inez. All smiling hands joined. I drew it. For when she wakes up, he added, proud and certain. I nodded. But the sight of that paper hollowed me out. His mother's face, drawn in crayon, felt more alive than the woman I'd watched moving in secret through a hospital room. I slid the picture into the register drawer and forced a smile. Delgado called an hour later. Got audio. You'll want to hear this. We met at the park near the benches by the duck pond, where I used to take Mason when he was little. Delgado's eyes were hard, his posture tense. He handed me a small recorder already playing. Inez's voice came through low, measured cold. After the insurance money, I'm gone. He'll be devastated, but better that than broke. A pause. Then another voice, male, calm, controlled. You'll meet me at the marina. No one suspects. Herrera. I knew the voice now. Delgado stopped the recording. That's enough to build a case, he said. I shook my head. Juan won't believe it without proof on paper. He'll think I'm trying to destroy her. He looked at me, expression flat. Then find it. Policies. Documents. Something that ties her name to the money. I pressed the recorder against my chest, feeling the weight of the voices still echoing inside it. At home, Mason was drawing again, sprawled on the floor with his crayons scattered. Juan sat silent in the armchair. A man fading by the day. I waited until Juan left for groceries. He always went early on Saturdays, a list in his hand and his mind somewhere else. Mason was outside drawing chalk patterns on the sidewalk, his world still small and safe. I climbed the stairs slowly. Their bedroom door opened with the same faint resistance it always had. Inside, the air was still. The bed made. Her robe hanging where she'd left it. The perfume hit me first, something floral, too sweet. I'd never liked it, but it was hers, and it lingered. I walked to her side of the dresser and opened the top drawer. Socks, makeup bags, sunglasses. The second drawer held scarves carefully folded. I lifted them one by one until I felt something stiff beneath them. 2 envelopes. I opened the first. A life insurance policy signed and dated 8 months ago. Beneficiary, Dr. Luis Herrera. Amount $250,000. The second was for long-term medical care. Same date, same signature, same beneficiary. I stared at the documents for a long time, letting the weight of the numbers settle into my chest. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures, but my hands were shaking so badly, the first few came out blurred. I steadied myself against the dresser, took them again, then slid everything back exactly where I found it. The drawer clicked shut, then the closet door creaked behind me. I turned. Juan stood there, a grocery bag in one hand. "What are you doing?" he asked. Voice low, eyes tired. "I was looking for old photos of Mason," I said, without flinching. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me for a beat too long. Then he turned and walked away. Back downstairs, I passed Mason still on the sidewalk, humming to himself. I didn't stop. I walked straight to Delgado's truck, already parked half a block down. He rolled down the window and I handed him the phone. Delgado was waiting in the front seat of his truck engine running window, already down. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a thick envelope and nodded toward the passenger seat. I climbed in, closed the door and opened it. He flipped through the photos for me one by one. I couldn't speak. Inez, in her hospital gown. Outside. First near the side entrance of the building, then near the back lot. Then smiling. Walking. And then laughing. In the next photo, she was pressed against a man in a white coat, lips on his, arms around his neck, his hand low on her waist. Herrera, the hospital director. My knees didn't buckle because I was sitting, but everything else gave way. Delgado watched me without pity. She's been out 5 nights this month. Always the same routine. She waits until the last nurse's round. Herrera meets her at the loading dock. They walk, talk, end up at his car. Then she comes back in before sunrise. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a small audio recorder. He pressed play. Her voice filled the cab. Calm, unbothered, cruel in its ease. "I'm not going back," she said. "Once this clears, I'm done. With all of them." Then Herrera's voice, smooth, steady. "I'll handle the paperwork. Just stay quiet until the payout hits." Delgado clicked it off. "That's your proof. You've got the papers, the footage, the audio. We're ready to take it to Brennan if you are." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The woman I had defended, held hands with at her wedding, cooked for when she said she couldn't eat from stress. The one I'd let move into my son's life without hesitation. She wasn't just lying. She was planning an exit that never included us. Delgado said nothing as I opened the door and stepped back into the fading light. The knock came mid-morning, sharp and heavy, the kind that doesn't wait to be welcomed. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. 3 men stood on the porch, tattoos winding up their arms, faces that didn't need to raise their voices to threaten. The one in front smiled without warmth. "We're looking for Inez," he said. "She owes us." I blinked once. "You've got the wrong house." "She used this address," he said, tapping his finger on a folded piece of paper. "She told us she'd pay once the insurance came through." Guessing that didn't happen yet. My throat tightened. "She's in a coma." The man's grin widened. "No, she's not. She's stalling. Tell her she's got 1 week." He shoved the note into my hand, turned, and walked away. The other 2 followed without a word, boots scraping the concrete. I closed the door and locked it twice. My hands were shaking again. The note was short, just a number and amount, and the words, 1 week. I called Delgado immediately. "They know," I said. "They came to the house." "Then we move fast," he replied. "I'll file the report tonight. Don't open your door for anyone." That evening, I sat at the kitchen table watching Mason color at the other end. Juan hadn't come home yet. Every sound outside made me flinch. Delgado texted close to midnight filed. "I'll set up a meeting in the morning." By sunrise, I was in the precinct office. Officer Brennan, sharp-eyed and composed, watched every clip, every document, every word. She didn't interrupt. When the last recording ended, she folded her hands. "We need her to break character," she said. "In public. That's the only way to end this cleanly." Delgado leaned back. "They've got a pattern. They'll move when the final medical decision is announced." I nodded already, knowing who would orchestrate that decision. Herrera. By the time I left the station, the day had turned hot. My phone buzzed as I reached the car, a call from the hospital. Herrera wanted to meet the family in the morning. The family stood in a tense semicircle around Inez's bed. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old flowers. Juan hovered near the headboard, one hand resting on the bed rail, the other clenched at his side. He looked thinner than last week. Hollowed out. Herrera entered quietly, a clipboard in his hand and a careful expression on his face. "I'm sorry," he began, addressing us all with a solemn tone. "We've done everything we can. It's time to discuss end-of-life care options." Gasps moved through the room like a ripple. Someone behind me, maybe Juan's cousin, started to cry. Juan stared at the floor, shoulders dropping. No one noticed how my eyes didn't leave Herrera. I knew what he was doing. This was the final act. The irreversible decline, the meeting, the signature. The trigger. I looked toward the door. Brennan stood just outside the hallway window, one hand on her radio gaze fixed. Herrera uncapped his pen and moved to the clipboard. My heart thudded. Then the door burst open. Uniforms rushed in, voices sharp and direct. "Inez Ortega, you are under arrest for insurance fraud and criminal conspiracy." Everything stopped. Inez sat up in one motion, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. Her eyes wide mouth open. The heart monitor wailed in protest. I can explain," she said, voice raw. No one moved. She turned her head slowly toward Juan. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He just took one slow step back, hand falling away from the rail like it burned him. The officers moved in Miranda rights echoing down the corridor. I felt nothing. Not triumph, not vengeance. Just stillness. Herrera's face was pale as paper. The clipboard slipped from his fingers, landing flat against the floor. Outside, Brennan stepped into the room and met my gaze. I gave her a nod. The sound of Velcro straps tightening echoed across the tile. Juan's eyes never left Inez. Not even when they took her away. By evening, we were home again. Mason sat on the couch with his knees pulled to his chest. He hadn't said a word since the arrest. The trial took 4 days. 4 long days of evidence playback and silence from the people who once smiled across my dinner table. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. They had the footage the hospital cameras Delgado installed. They had the audio. They had the blurry video Mason recorded that started everything. The policies, the bank transfers, the phone logs, Herrera's signature on doctored records, Inez's voice steady and cruel discussing the payout, like it was already hers. Inez sat at the defense table, expression blank. Herrera looked like a man unraveling in slow motion. Neither spoke more than a few words. On the 3rd day, Inez changed her plea to guilty. Herrera followed the next morning. I didn't cry. I watched the proceedings with my hands folded in my lap and my spine straight. Juan sat beside me, rigid, unmoving. He hadn't said a word since the arrest, only nodded when told where to go. Ate, what was placed in front of him, slept barely. At sentencing, the courtroom was still. Inez stood in a tan jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front of her. Herrera beside her. The judge read the charges. 5 years each. No appeal. I looked at Juan. He stared ahead, then spoke softly, as if to himself. "I loved her," he said. "I really did. I kept my voice even. She loved what you could give." He didn't argue. Mason sat between us, a small fingers curling around mine. He hadn't asked where his mother went. Not once. He just drew fewer houses, fewer stick figures. Some nights, I'd find him staring at blank paper like he didn't know what to fill it with anymore. We walked out of the courthouse into gray light. No reporters, no crowd. Just the quiet sound of the city moving on without us. At home, I peeled off my coat and started a pot of water for tea. Juan took out the trash without being asked. Mason climbed onto the couch and picked up a book he hadn't touched in weeks, and for the first time in months, no one mentioned her name. Spring came slowly that year, as if the world itself needed time to thaw. The trees outside the kitchen window bloomed late shyly, like they weren't sure it was safe to open again. Juan started sleeping through the night. Not always, but enough. The deep, bone-heavy sleep of someone finally too tired to carry what broke him. He moved back into the spare bedroom without a word. No ceremony, just clean sheets and a locked door. Mason laughed more. Not every day, but when he did, it reached his eyes. He helped me sweep the front step of the bakery and asked for extra cinnamon on his toast. He kept his drawings in a new folder. Fewer families, more animals. Foxes and owls and something that looked like a phoenix. I repainted the bakery walls. Soft cream. No stencils. Just color and light. It smelled like flour again, instead of fear. On Saturdays, Juan came early to help me knead dough. He worked in silence, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands steady. He didn't drink anymore. I never asked how he stopped. He never told me, but his eyes were clearer now, his shoulders less heavy. Sometimes we talk about her. Mostly we don't. We talk about Mason's spelling test, about the rising price of flour, about the neighbor's new puppy that won't stop barking. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the roofline, Mason looked up from his book and asked, "Do you think people can change back?" I wiped my hands on a towel and sat beside him. "Only if they want to," I said. He nodded once, then stood and ran outside with his bike helmet in hand. I watched from the porch as he pedaled down the street, legs pumping hair, catching the wind. I'd changed the locks weeks ago, not out of fear, just because it felt right. Inside the house, the windows were open. The air moved freely again. The walls didn't hold their breath anymore. In the quiet that followed, I folded a clean apron over a chair and turned off the light.